Ethan Turner never expected a simple evening to change the way he saw his quiet life in Portland, Oregon, but everything shifted the moment Claire Bennett knocked on his apartment door carrying a warm box that smelled like vanilla and comfort. For months he had admired her from a distance, the friendly young woman from the floor above who always carried flour on her hands and hope in her smile, the woman whose weekend cakes filled the building with sweetness and made neighbors pause in the hallway just to breathe in the aroma. Ethan never admitted it out loud, but he planned his Saturday mornings around the faint sound of Claire's mixer running upstairs. It had become a strange, gentle part of his routine, something that made his home feel less lonely. That rainy evening, when she stepped into his doorway with her hair slightly messy from baking and her cheeks soft from the warmth of the kitchen, he felt a familiar flutter that he always tried to hide. She lifted the lid and revealed a small vanilla almond cake, steam rising into the dim hallway light, and said she wanted him to taste it because she trusted his reactions more than the compliments of anyone else. Ethan, half teasing and half wishing she could see the truth behind his smile, took a bite and let the soft sweetness melt on his tongue. Before thinking, he grinned and said, "Claire, will you marry me? I'll eat every cake you bake." The words were meant to be light, a joke tossed into the air to keep things safe, but the way Claire looked at him, eyes widening, surprise turning into something deeper and softer, caught him completely off guard. She didn't laugh like he expected, instead she whispered, voice almost trembling, "I thought you'd never ask." For a second Ethan's heart stumbled, unsure whether she was joking back or revealing something she had hidden under all her quiet smiles. The rain outside tapped against the window like a steady drum, and time felt strangely slow as they stood there, two people pretending not to feel more than they should. Ethan tried to brush it off with a laugh, but Claire didn't move, her expression unreadable and sincere enough to make his chest tighten. Just when he opened his mouth to ask what she meant, her phone rang sharply through the silence. She glanced at the screen, and the soft glow in her eyes shifted to worry so quickly it startled him. "It's my mom," she said, already stepping back. "Ethan, I'm sorry, I need to go." He tried to ask if everything was okay, but she was already hurrying down the hall, her steps echoing as the door to the stairwell closed behind her. Ethan stood there holding the empty cake box, confused and suddenly aware that he knew so little about the world behind her smile. The hallway smelled like sweet almonds, but the warmth in his apartment felt thinner than usual. He waited for her to return to finish their strange half-conversation, but minutes turned into hours, and she didn't come back. That night, as rain kept falling against the glass, Ethan replayed their moment again and again, the soft way she said she'd been waiting, the way her eyes held something he couldn't read, something that felt bigger than a joke. He kept telling himself she was fine, that she'd knock again like she always did, but when morning arrived, the hallway was silent, no baking smell drifted down the stairs, and her apartment windows stayed dark. For the first time since he'd met her, Claire's absence felt heavy, like a missing piece he suddenly realized mattered more than he wanted to admit. And as Ethan stood by his window watching the quiet street below, he couldn't shake the feeling that his careless joke had uncovered something real, something he wasn't ready for, and something Claire had been quietly holding in her heart. The next 2 days felt strangely long for Ethan, because Claire didn't appear in the hallway, didn't knock on his door with a new cake, and didn't send even a short message to explain what had happened after she rushed away that rainy night. At first he tried to tell himself she was just busy, maybe spending time with her mother, but the silence inside the building felt heavier than usual, as if something important had shifted between them and now hung in the air without explanation. Ethan kept stopping his work every time he heard footsteps on the stairs, hoping it was Claire, but every time it turned out to be someone else, he felt a small drop of disappointment he didn't want to admit. The memory of her soft words, "I thought you'd never ask," kept replaying in his mind, confusing him more every hour. Was she serious? Did his joke mean something to her? Or had he accidentally stepped into a part of her life he wasn't supposed to see? On the third evening, as the sun was dipping behind the buildings and the hallway lights flicked on with a quiet buzz, Ethan finally saw her returning home. She looked tired, almost fragile, carrying a small grocery bag and wearing a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. He stepped out of his apartment without thinking. "Claire? Are you okay?" he asked gently. She paused at her door, shifting the bag in her hands, and sighed. "I'm sorry I disappeared," she said softly. "I had to stay with my mom. Her health, it's not great right now." Her voice cracked in a way that made Ethan's stomach tighten with concern. He wished she had told him earlier so he wouldn't spend days worrying or misreading the space between them. "You should have said something," he said quietly. "You don't have to handle everything alone." Claire's expression softened, touched by his concern. "You already do more than you know," she whispered, and for a moment he saw the weight she carried, responsibility, fear, exhaustion, all hidden behind the sweet, warm energy she always shared with others. They ended up sitting together on the building stairs, talking about her mother's illness, her worries, and the pressure of managing everything by herself while still trying to keep her dream of baking alive. The more she opened up, the more Ethan realized how strong she had been the whole time, and how little he truly knew about the quiet struggles behind her gentle smile. He wanted to tell her he cared, maybe more than he should, but he didn't want to overwhelm her when she already felt stretched thin. Still, every time she looked at him with tired eyes, he felt something inside him settle into clarity. He didn't want Claire facing any of this alone. She deserved support, warmth, someone to lean on when life felt too heavy. He wanted to be that person. But just when he finally gathered the courage to say something real, Claire took a quiet breath and said, "Ethan, there's something I should have told you long ago." Her tone was careful, almost nervous, and his heart sped up. Maybe she was going to explain her strange reaction to his joke, or admit something he had been sensing but couldn't name. But before she could speak another word, a neighbor from the third floor rushed down the stairs calling her name urgently, asking for her help with a sudden problem. Claire stood quickly, offered Ethan an apologetic smile, and ran after the neighbor, leaving Ethan sitting alone on the steps with all his unspoken questions floating in the dim hallway. The moment felt unfinished, like a book that closed in the middle of a sentence, and Ethan knew there was something Claire needed to tell him, something she finally tried to say but couldn't. And as he watched her disappear around the corner, he couldn't stop wondering what truth she had been holding back, and why she looked so afraid to say it. The next afternoon, Ethan found Claire sitting alone on the building's rooftop garden, a quiet place she often went to think, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, her eyes distant as if she were staring at something only she could see, and the sight made his chest tighten because he could tell she was carrying more than just worry. About her mother, he stepped closer and asked softly, "Claire, what were you trying to tell me yesterday?" She hesitated, glancing at the steaming tea, then finally exhaled as if letting go of a heavy weight. "I wasn't sure if I should say it. I've kept it inside for too long, but maybe hiding it only makes things harder." The wind lifted her hair, and Ethan felt the soft warmth of her presence despite the distance her words created, and he listened as she continued, almost afraid of her own confession. "I like you, Ethan. I've liked you for a long time, more than I should probably admit. I tried to ignore it because my life is messy right now. My mom is sick, my bakery plans are unstable, and I didn't want to drag you into all my problems." Ethan's heart swelled because he realized that the moments they shared, even small ones like tasting her cakes or chatting in the hallway, had been equally meaningful to her, and now every laugh, glance, and small touch felt like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. "Claire," he said gently, "I want to be in your life, all of it, the good and the messy. I don't care about perfection, I care about you." Her lips quivered into a faint, hopeful smile, and she leaned a little closer, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Even if I'm not sure where I'm going?" He took her hand in his, holding it lightly but firmly. "Then we'll figure it out together. I'm not going anywhere." For a long moment, they didn't speak, letting the gentle hum of the city and the rustle of leaves fill the space around them, a quiet connection forming between two hearts that had been circling each other for months, and Ethan realized that love could grow in the spaces between words, in silences shared and glances held, in trust quietly earned. But just as he felt the perfect moment approaching, when the world seemed to pause and everything was finally aligned, Claire's phone buzzed, and the glow on her face vanished as she read the message, her body stiffening with worry. "My mom," she said, voice breaking slightly, standing up so fast that Ethan almost didn't catch her hand before she pulled away. "Ethan, I have to go. Right now." Without waiting for questions or explanations, she hurried toward the elevator, her bag swinging lightly at her side, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he ran after her, unsure what he would find but certain that whatever it was, it mattered deeply to her. He followed her through the lobby and onto the rainy streets, realizing that life had suddenly become urgent and fragile in a way it never had before, and that the bond forming between them could not wait, even for clarity, for plans, or for simple words left unspoken. And as they reached the hospital, with Claire's pace frantic and determined, Ethan saw the real weight of her world, the love and responsibility she carried for her mother, and he understood that supporting her, being there for her, was more than a choice. It was a chance to show that the feelings they had been circling were real, strong, and ready to grow, even in the face of fear, uncertainty, and the challenges life threw at them. When Ethan and Claire reached the hospital, the tension in her steps and the worry in her eyes made his heart race, and he stayed close to her, offering silent support as she checked in and navigated the bustling corridors, realizing in that moment how much courage she carried inside her delicate frame and how much he wanted to be her strength through it all. The hours inside the hospital waiting room were long, filled with quiet whispers, shared fears, and the sound of distant machines, and Ethan never left her side, holding her hand as she clutched it tightly, feeling both relief and anxiety in equal measures, until finally the doctor came out with a small, reassuring smile and told them that Claire's mother was stable, and the weight of weeks of worry lifted from her shoulders, flooding her eyes with tears that Ethan gently wiped away as she leaned into him, her head resting briefly on his shoulder, and for the first time, they allowed themselves to breathe, to feel the comfort of being together in a world that had seemed uncertain and chaotic just hours before. Once they were allowed to leave, they walked through the quiet hospital garden, the cool evening breeze brushing past them as Claire turned to Ethan, her voice trembling with a mixture of exhaustion, gratitude, and unspoken emotion. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly, and he smiled warmly, squeezing her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," and in that simple promise, a new depth of understanding passed between them, one that transcended words and fear. Because both of them had glimpsed the fragility of life and the importance of holding on to love when it mattered most, they sat on a nearby bench, the city lights twinkling like stars around them, and finally, Claire let herself be vulnerable, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at him and whispered, "That night, when you joked about marrying me, I was surprised, but secretly I had imagined it, hoped for it, maybe even waited for it, more times than I can count." And Ethan's heart raced as he realized that the playful words he thought were a simple joke had meant far more to her than he had imagined, that their connection had been building quietly, in small moments of laughter, in shared smiles, in the ordinary rituals of tasting her cakes and talking in the hallways, until now it could no longer stay hidden. He took a deep breath. Leaning closer, "Claire, it wasn't a joke. I mean it. I want a future with you. Not just for the cakes, not just for the easy moments, but for everything," and her eyes filled with tears, but the smile that broke across her face was full of hope and joy, the kind that comes only when you realize someone sees the real you and still chooses to stay. She laughed softly, a sound that carried relief, love, and a quiet triumph. "Ethan Turner, if you ever ask me for real, I already know my answer," and he reached for her hands, holding them gently but firmly. "Then let me try again. Claire Bennett, will you marry me? Not just for the sweetness you bake, but for the life we can build together?" Her voice trembled with happiness as she whispered, "I thought you'd never ask," and in that moment, the world seemed to settle around them, the fears, the chaos, the uncertainty, all melting away as they laughed and held each other, realizing that a simple joke had grown into a promise, a hope, and the start of something real and beautiful, a love that had survived hesitation, worry, and silence, and now stood bold, warm, and full of possibility, ready to be nurtured and cherished for all the days ahead.